So Dave, how's life living up in Dublin?
It's good, yeah. Not too bad. It's nice and warm, and it's drier than Galway, but it's good in
Oh,
general. The big smoke, the big city.
okay. I was just wondering because we had some listeners writing in, and they said that since Dave moved to Dublin, he seems to be a bit of a prick.
No, but
So
fun fact, I was always a prick. It's just we have more listeners now.
that must be it. And it got me to thinking: is there something about living in the east and being a bit of a prick? I'm not
Yeah.
too sure because I'm over here in the west in Galway, and people are like, "You seem sound," but Dave, I don't know about him now. He seems to get. I've gotten all high and mighty up there in Dublin in the big smoke. So that kind of got the wheels turning, and I was like, I know who else are pricks that live in the east, the Easterlings. So I thought we'd have a little look at them today.
Ah, yes, that is what they call us.
Dave, who are the Easterlings, and where do we get to see them in Peter Jackson's films?
So, in Peter Jackson's films, they are the fellas that seem to don the kind of reddish cloaks, but they have gold spiky armor at the front, and they have cool gold tin helmet things. Or, yeah, they look like tin helmets, but they're like golden
Tin
in
men.
color. Yes, and they wear eyeliner.
They do. They look great.
And we see them. I think they're based on the Persian army, if I remember back to our earlier podcast. Yes, where we did like Tolkien inspirations and stuff, or maybe like Peter Jackson inspirations. But yeah, I think we get to see them up and close the most when the two hobbits and Gollum are at the Morannon, or the Black Gate, to viewers of the Lord of the Rings, and they're not sure if they're going to go, and Frodo wants to go, and Smeagol's saying no, and then they end up tumbling down right in front of the gate as all the Easterlings are marching in to the Black Gate, and then one or is it two fellas come over and kind of
Two
investigate.
lads approach.
Yeah, and that's when we get a good look at their armor.
Yeah.
But yeah,
It's the
other
first time
than
we get to see that they're not the most observant people in the world when they can't distinguish between a rock and a cloak.
a hard place.
I mean, to be fair, it was a pretty good camouflage with that cloak, but
It was.
yeah, they should have seen them.
Yeah, but what I always thought was strange is just like, there's nothing on that little cliffside or that edge at all. So like they would see them tumbling, or they would see, it's like they only heard like 2 minutes later.
We didn't get a proper view from their side, I suppose. So I always assumed, there's probably just little troughs and valleys and little bits and pieces in the way. So I'm just going to give them the credit for that. Just say, there's probably other stuff in the way that it was like shielding their view. But well done. You absolutely nailed it there. You smashed it. Yeah, we do get that view of them walking in through the Black Gates when Sam and Frodo were up on their big high vantage point, and they're looking and they're like, how the hell are we going to get in? And suddenly the gates open. And why do they open? Because this big regiment, this big army are just kind of marching in the doors. And it's the first time we get to see them. We do see them, I think maybe only one more time. They kind of feature on the Pelennor Fields, or just actually briefly after the gates of Minas Tirith have been breached. They're like advancing upon the soldiers of Gondor, but they're not actually seen fighting at all, which is a bit of a letdown. It's a bit of a, it is something that I would have loved to have seen these guys in action, because as you said, they could be based on like a Persian army, or there's some art. I'm not sure if it's actual official art or if it's just like kind of fan art that kind of shows them. They're almost designed to look like samurai as well. So there's definitely sort of kind of a Eastern vibe going on, and I reckon just their fighting style would have been really cool to see as well, because we see them, they use a lot of like long spears, and then they have their broadswords as well. So
their weapons are those spears. They're kind of like, what's on the end? They kind of look like axes at the top, or like spiked axes, and they're pretty cool. But also you mentioned there that you see them just as the gate is breached at Minas Tirith, and there's so many stills, I would say, from that scene where people go, oh look, there's actually loads of Easterlings in the background, because you don't get to see any of them up close and fighting one-on-one with anyone, but you do see a lot of bits of them in the background. And then obviously in the battlefield, after the battle is over, like on the Pelennor Fields, you see a lot of their sigils and their spikes and spears and shields,
bodies
and
strewn around the place.
all their guts spread all over the place.
Yeah, they had lots of guts, these lads. But who were they? So, first of all, what race are they? They are a race of men, and they populated the vast lands of Rhun, which is in the east. It's kind of, if you look at a map, it's like it's almost directly north, slightly northeast of Mordor, but it's like, it's all that land then east, northeast of Mordor, and just way off there. And you've got the Sea of Rhun is a big thing that takes up a huge space on the map as well. And yeah, as we said, we see them in that scene. We get to see they've got like eye makeup on under their helmets. It's probably like kind of like Batman, so that's kind of cool. But the description that we get here is that as of the Third Age, the Easterlings were a people diverse in height and skin tone. Their skin was either sallow or olive, their eyes were dark, and their straight hair was black. And it says that one unique group who wouldn't fall into that description appeared at the siege of Gondor, described as broad, short, bearded, and wielding axes. So almost kind of dwarf-like.
Yeah, weird.
So that's something that we should consider now while we're moving on, listening to more about the Easterlings. They weren't just like one small party. This was like a massive expanse of land that just had, tribes and peoples of all different different backgrounds kind of coming together. And so there was loads of different cultures all in this kind of what we would now call the Easterlings. But they were definitely very diverse.
I suppose it's similar to real life as well. Like a lot of people they might say, oh, this person is Asian, and you might have one specific look for that kind of person. But when you actually go like, okay, well, Asia, you've got India, you've got like the Middle East, and then you've got China and Japan, and then Southeast Asia, and like
of course,
it's so many. And then within obviously all those countries themselves, sure, in our little island of Ireland, we've got, the people over in the west of Ireland are the most beautiful people in all the land, and then you go down to like Cork and Kerry, and
you see Harfoots down there.
Yeah, I'm just kidding. We love you, Kerry and Cork folk.
I don't know half of you half as well as I should like.
But we're going to actually look at the background now of these Easterlings and see where it all began. So we're going to go way back. We're going to bring it back to the Sons of Fëanor. If anybody knows, that's quite a bit back now. And in particular, we're going to look at the eldest and the tallest of the 7 sons of Fëanor, who was called Maedhros. And he would be familiar to people who've seen any kind of artwork as well done him. He's always just like this big, tall, with long, luscious red hair. Because another one of his names was Russandul, which was the Elvish name, which basically translated to copper top. So
ginger.
For his red hair. Yeah. If you don't know what I'm talking about, these are the sons of Fëanor. They were back in the very first age of Middle Earth, and Fëanor was this like very, very important elf who created the Silmarils. If you've ever heard of the Silmarillion, the book, that's what it's all about. His sons swore an oath, and that kind of kicked off all of this madness back in the day. But this guy that we're looking at now, so Maedhros, he was morally opposed to this oath that the sons of Fëanor kind of came up with, but he was tied to his family and he was bound by honor. And speaking of being tied and bound, he's also the guy who got captured by Morgoth and got tied to the side of a tower, and he was kind of hung off the edge of a tower by his wrist for 30 years. And he was just hanging there for 30 years. So eventually a cousin of his came along and rescued him, but they had to do so by doing like a 127 hours job and kind of cut off his hand. And so anyway, it grew back. It's okay. I'm not joking. Of course it did. Anyway, after his rescue, he went on to do some great things, and he established a great fortress called the March of Maedhros, and that's where these Easterlings come into play. So again, we're looking at the first age here. So we're looking at the very first men who appeared on Middle Earth. Now, if you know anything else about Tolkien, you know that when he talks about the beginning of the elves and the dwarves, and he kind of just says that they awoke, and he'll say they awoke in blah, 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 some place in the middle of Middle Earth, and then they kind of sprouted out from there, and that's where it all began. So it's similar enough here with the first men, that they awoke in the East. And so that was where they were originally from. They were from the East. And it says that early on, some of them were corrupted by Morgoth, prompting others to migrate westward. So right at the beginning, they awoke in the East, and they started to like straight away kind of follow Morgoth. And then the people that weren't into that were like, hey, we're leaving. We're going to go head west. And those people that headed west were then called the Edain, who we hear a lot about then later on. And so there were loads of battles in the First Age, and there was like lots of just warring over and back between Morgoth and the elves, and it was just non-stop battles. But basically there was a fourth great battle, which was called the Battle of Sudden Flame. And this was the fourth great battle in the wars of Beleriand. Beleriand is the area where the elves were all hanging out. And this was a war between the forces of Morgoth and the Noldor, which were the elves of Beleriand. And Dave, do you have any recollection of what happened in that battle? The Battle of Sudden Flame, it was called.
Is this the battle where we first hear of dragons and dragonfire?
It's very close. It's the second second time we get to see dragons. So the father of all dragons, Glaurung, he actually kind of disobeyed Morgoth and came out, charged out. This is a couple of centuries before, charged out and attacked some random elves, and that was the first time they'd ever seen a dragon. Like Morgoth was just kind of coming up with the ideas and breeding these dragons. And this dragon, he didn't actually have any wings. He was more like a giant
worm.
Well,
he wasn't.
Basically,
they called him a worm, but like
they describe him as a worm. Yeah,
he was more like a bear. Or he was more like an iguana, like a huge, big iguana.
He looked like a big Triceratops,
and he had the power to move you. Well, actually, no, he did. He had the opposite. He had the power, to freeze you. Yes, with his eyes.
So
he
would
just
kind
look
of
at
mind
you,
control, telekinesis, different things. Anyway, this is we're getting off topic here, but this is Glaurung, the father of all dragons. Very interesting guy. And he, as I said, he revealed himself too early, and Morgoth kind of got angry at him, and he was like, you were part of my secret plan, but he kind of let the elves know already that these things were kind of being bred. So that happened, and then 200 years later, this is now his second appearance. But it's called the Battle of Sudden Flame. So it was the first time that the elves had ever kind of come up against any of these kind of forces. So Morgoth released his full power at this point. There were loads of dragons, and also there were loads of Balrogs, and then there was like Balrogs on backs of dragons and all sorts. It was just complete.
And that heavily
mental.
Yeah, then that bodes well for all the people that hypothesize that the Balrogs don't have wings and can't fly, can't fly, because why were they on the backs of dragons? But yeah, the Battle of Sudden Flame is where Balrogs are riding dragons, and it seems pretty cool. But that was almost like a tricksy question, because it should have been the first battle where dragons appeared. Right?
Yeah, it should be called the Battle of Sudden Flame again.
Yeah. Part 2. That was just a teaser trailer.
Yeah. The Battle of One More Flame. But
two
anyway,
battle, two
on.
flame.
Yeah, flame with a vengeance. So that battle happened anyway, and then centuries later, so that was a big win for Morgoth in this battle. Loads of elves died, and so a few centuries later, these tribes of men then kind of came into this area. They came in and they joined the Edain in Beleriand. Remember, the Edain were the original men who got away from the original Morgoth following men. So these other men came along and they joined these Edain. And these men came from the east, and they were referred to as Easterlings. And they arrived in two separate forces under two fierce leaders known as Ulfang and Bor the Faithful, was his little tag on his name. So just reading a little excerpt here from the Tolkien Gateway, it says, in the almost 2 decades since their defeat in the Dagor Bragollach, that's the Tolkien's name for the Battle of Sudden Flame, the Noldor, who are the elves, had lost control over the entire north of Beleriand and were for the most part reduced to refugees dwindling in Hithlum and Nargothrond. Gondolin was shut up and unknown. In the First Age, 468, Maedhros, after hearing the deeds of Beren and Luthien, perceived Morgoth was not unassailable and planned to take the offence against Angband before Morgoth would destroy them all one by one. Thus, he set out plans to reunite the foes of Morgoth under a new league, the Union of Maedhros. That was the name of this new league that he was coming up with. So, remember, this is Maedhros, the guy we spoke about, this red-hedged son of Fëanor. Under this union of Maedhros, all the elves of Beleriand, as well as the Edain, dwarves, and the newly arrived Easterlings, were invited to combine in arms and fight Morgoth. The smithies of Nogrod and Belagost were busy preparing weapons, and the Easterlings, following Bor and Ulfang, were trained for war. In West Beleriand, the Noldor in Hithlum prepared for war. So
awesome.
That's just a cool little excerpt talking about the build-up to this war, and Maedhros, he's like the leader of all the sons of Feanor, and he's there trying to like gather all these peoples under him. He's got, okay, we got elves, we got men, we got dwarves, and then we've got
From
these
all
new men,
locations.
these Easterlings that have just arrived, and under these two chieftains, these two fierce warriors, Ulfang and Bor. So we're just going to look at those two chieftains for a moment here. So we're going to look first of all at Bor, and I said he's also called Bor the Faithful. So Bor was a chieftain of men who came into Beleriand after the Battle of Sudden Flame, and he and his sons Borlad, Borlak, and Borthad. You can see he was like, I'm Bor, so all my sons are going to be Bor or something.
I sense a theme.
Yeah. So all of those, he and his sons, they were welcomed by Maedhros, who gifted him lands north and south of the March of Maedhros. Bor and his sons had been ordered by Morgoth to betray the sons of Feanor, but Bor swore allegiance to Maedhros and remained faithful to him.
Wow.
He was one of the few leaders of the eastern tribes of men to remain faithful to the Eldar during the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, which is the next big battle, the fifth big battle. However, this loyalty came at the cost of his life. The elves, grateful for his loyalty, posthumously awarded him the title Faithful. So then after that, they would refer to him as Bor the Faithful, because he remained
only
faithful.
when he died.
Like, oh, look at that.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's cool.
But moving on then to Ulfang. Ulfang also came to Beleriand shortly after Bor, but at Morgoth's bidding. And Ulfang and his sons, again 3 sons, what were their... What their names begin with? All with UL pretty much. So we had
Ulfingel, Ulfart, and Ulfadeus.
Ulful. It was really Ulful, these guys. So you had Ulfast, Ulworth, and the final one, Uldor the Accursed, which is a cool little...
Imagine naming your child that.
Yeah, exactly. That was his full name.
Yeah.
So these all joined the service of another of the sons of Feanor called Caranthir, and they were all given lands to dwell in the east of Beleriand. However, of course, as I said, unbeknownst to the sons of Feanor, Ulfang and his followers were secretly in the employ of Morgoth, and they betrayed the Eldar and the Edain during the disastrous Battle of Unnumbered Tears in what became known as the Treachery of Men. So men got a bad name that day.
Yeah.
It wasn't good. So they betrayed, as I said, the Eldar, who are the elves, and the Edain, who are the other men who had been living in the west all along. So they betrayed their own men. But though Morgoth was victorious in that battle, all 3 of Ulfang's sons were killed there. So
well, that's good, because they all had
loyalty to
shitty
Morgoth
names.
wasn't great. I don't know. I'd like if I was like, oh, here he comes, your man, the Accursed.
Yeah.
Don't want to get in his wrong side.
Rumour grew of a shadow in the east.
Now, you'll have heard me mention Hithlum there a couple of times. It's an area up in the kind of north, where lots of the north of Beleriand, where lots of the elves were living. If anybody wants to know where is Beleriand, basically look at a map of Middle Earth, and the whole sea everything that you can see that's under the sea on the left side of the map on the west, that all used to be Beleriand, but it all got kind of destroyed and fell under the sea. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, Hithlum,
well,
that's where, isn't that like Doriath? Isn't that the capital of Hithlum?
Yes,
I think so.
I believe it is.
Because that's
so
where
very well done.
a lot of the Children of Hurin takes place. In different places.
Spoiler for this very podcast.
Okay. By the way, I just wanted to interject there, because when we had Bor and his 3 boring sons, and then we had Ulfang and his 3 awful sons, it really reminded me of, if anyone knows, the very famous composer Johann Sebastian Bach. Well, his father was Johann Bach, and his uncle, I think, was Johann Christian Bach. And then Johann himself had, he had 9 or 10 children. And I think 6 of them were called Johann, including a girl. And one of them was even called Johann Christian Bach. So, in his own, household, in his own family, there was 2 Johann Christian Bachs. And I don't know, there were so many Johanns around that period of time. It was crazy.
For being a creative genius, he wasn't really able to come up with any creative names, was he?
No, but like everyone that inspired his life as well. His one of his teachers was Johann. Well, like everyone seemed to be Johann around him. It was a gas time for wherever he. Is he from? He's German.
Bach was German. Was German, wasn't he?
Yeah. He's something like that.
Yeah, over there in the east.
Ooh.
So we're going to talk about Hithlum for just a couple of moments. So after this battle of unnumbered tears, which is called, at the behest of Morgoth, the Easterlings invaded Hithlum in the northwest. They spread throughout the wide lands, plundering, destroying, and killing its inhabitants. The Eldar of Hithlum were able to escape from the invaders by taking refuge in the southern mountains that later the Easterlings avoided out of fear of the elves. The Easterlings soon withdrew northwards and apparently settled. However, the Easterlings were betrayed by their master. Morgoth locked them solely in Hithlum and denied them the rich lands of Beleriand that they so desired. And here their chieftain Lorgan, who you might remember from the Children of Hurin, he governed with cruelty, robbing from and enslaving the remaining men of Hithlum, who called the Easterlings the incomers. They took away the young and the able-bodied and sometimes took young women to be wives. And then another couple of names that you're going to recognize here. Tur, who was the cousin of Turin, he was also enslaved in Hithlum by the Easterlings, being forced to serve Lorgan. After 3 years, he was able to escape his captors and evaded by living as an outlaw until he was contacted by the Vala Ulmo, and he went off to Gondolin after that. So there's lots of stories here kind of intertwined, and if you have ever read Silmarillion, you'll have just like every chapter is like a new little story, and there is a little kind of common theme that's weaving in between them, and these Easterlings are involved all the time. So just finally on that, the Easterlings ruled effectively in Hithlum as vassals of Morgoth for over 100 years, and they answered their master's summons, and they fought against the host of the West in the War of Wrath. And those that survived Morgoth's overthrow fled back to the Blue Mountains to Eriador and beyond, where they split into smaller kingdoms and tribes.
Deadly. I think actually when you mentioned there about the Easterlings enslaving people up in Hithlum, that did jog my memory of the Children of Hurin. I believe Turin's mother was kept back in Doriath. Morwen, yes, exactly. Oh, it's all coming back to me now. Yeah, she was her village that she lived in was captured by Easterlings, and I think they went and like actually became husbands to all these women that were just like stuck in Doriath, and I think they ended up kind of getting a little bit of Stockholm syndrome. They got on well, or they weren't like under complete. You know, it wasn't terrible for them, but it still wasn't.
You've a good memory, Dave. You've a good memory, because I
do not.
I did come across that while I was researching this episode, and I was going to include some more stuff about Moron, but I was like, look, I think we have enough in now what I've put into this episode so far. So we're not going to get to Morwen, who is
it's a tale for another podcast.
But we do have a little mention there of Tur, who was Turin's cousin. So I was like, that's enough from that family. Good. We don't want to get any further into that. Sorry, I said Turin was. I said Moran was his mother. That was his wife, and their son was Hurin. Then, no, I'm getting all mixed up.
Hurin is the father.
God, okay.
Hurin is the father of Turin.
Yeah, exactly.
And they were touring around the place.
They were also
Hurin. Who's on tour?
Right, so that's a big bit of info dumped there about the whole First Age and what was going on. We are going to get into more of the timeline and what happened in the Second Age, but first of all, I just wanted to bring it back, change the flavour a little bit, and talk about some of the inspirations that Peter Jackson got for these. Now, Dave, you already mentioned at the very beginning how they got stylized, so well done. You got that really bang on.
Thank you.
Go back and read that, or look back at that again. So for Peter Jackson's inspirations, the Easterlings are depicted as and heavily stylized as this kind of vaguely Middle Eastern culture. In the appendices of the special extended edition of The Two Towers, the artists claim that they were inspired by a variety of Persian cultures, particularly the Sassanid Persians, Mongol horsemen, and the Ottoman Turks. They have crests on the backs of their hat-like helmets that resemble feudal samurai crests. They also bear a rising sun emblem on their armour. The full body armour the Easterlings wear resembles armour which ancient Chinese soldiers wore, and beneath their armour they wear veils, headscarves, and robes. So, and then the final thing is that in some movie models, their boots have upturned toes, suggesting like a Mongolic or a Turkic or a Persian influence as well. So,
And whatever Aladdin was, was he Arabian? Arabian. Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool. And actually, you get a little, I don't know, you get a little sprinkling in Peter Jackson's movies of what the Easterlings are, but like, as you know, and as I've mentioned many times on this podcast, like my whole lore, well, not even real lore, but just my world of Middle Earth exploded in like games, and one of the most popular ones would be the Battle for Middle Earth, where there are Easterlings and Haradrim that are part of, you know, the evil forces army, and there might even be a faction in the second game that's just pure wicked men of the East. I'm not sure if that's right, but the cool thing is you get to see all the different types of almost Peter Jackson styled versions of, you know, a Haradrim warrior, a Haradrim archer, a Haradrim like knight, and like their buildings as well and all that kind of stuff. So like that is all canon for me. Like I just feel like I know exactly what an archery range for an Easterling looks like, and you know what a mill would look like. But yeah,
class.
Dope.
It's deadly. Yeah. And again, I think, you know, some of that has to be kind of considered canon as well. Like maybe in a kind of like a
separate canon.
I don't know.
Like,
an
like
alternative canon. Yeah, it's kind of like a head canon.
Well, what is
just
canon?
Like a parallel universe canon.
Yeah, exactly. Because like you and I were introduced to Lord of the Rings through the films, but like a lot of that is completely not canon. You know, somebody else who would have been who might be 60 years old now, read the books for 30 odd years before the movies came out. Well, then they wouldn't be reading them when they're 0, but you know what I mean? They would be like, well, Frodo cannot be canon, like he's 50 years old, so that's just non-canonical, but like the rest of it might be okay. So it's just whatever
canon
your own canon
is a brand of camera. That's all it is.
That's true.
We should leave it at. No, but actually, I had a little piece here on the video games. So now that you brought it up, I might as well just get into that as well.
Awesome.
So,
my favorite part.
I know, yeah. Video games, yeah. Games. DVDs. Books.
DVDs! Books.
So, speaking of the video games, one of the biggest video games for Lord of the Rings that I've never actually played is called The Lord of the Rings Online, which is also known as Lotro. Good man, Dave. Yeah, you were in there before me. So, the men collectively referred to as Easterlings by the Free Peoples of the West are portrayed as several distinct clans, and they all have their different appearances. So I'm just going to list a couple that are mentioned in that game, and they all kind of have their different factions, and they have their different tasks that they do as well. So you've got the Kundalor Easterlings, and they attack Rohan. That's what you see them doing mostly in that game. You've got the Jangovar Easterlings, and they attack Django, and they attack Dale and the Lonely Mountain.
And Boba
you've
Fett.
got the you've got the Suhalar Easterlings, and these are shorter in stature, in stature, I nearly said. They're shorter in stature. They're shorter in stature, and they're armed with axes to the point where some mistake them for dwarves. And their armies participate in the Siege of Gondor. So those are the ones that.
That's cool.
Again, this is the video game canon, as we said, but this is also correct to what I mentioned at the beginning, that the ones that were mentioned as having been part of the Siege of Gondor at the Battle of Pelennor Fields, they were described as being shorter, with being shorter and broad and having beards and axes. So quite like, you know, they could be blended in and look like dwarves. So that would be interesting. And there was one other faction of Easterlings mentioned in this game. They were called the Cheasir Easterlings, and these are craftsmen and tradesmen with no love for Sauron, and they take no part in the Great War of the Ring.
Oh, like Treebeard.
Basically, they're like, nobody's on our side, so we're just going to be over here with Bor and his boring family, and we're like, no, they wouldn't be hanging out with Bor at all. Other video games, we've got the Third Age, one of our Dave and my both one of our favorite games. So there's tribesmen of Rune, and they appear in this video game, and they utilize javelins and axes and spears. These are their weapons. Now I just call them tribesmen of Rune, and I kind of not sure if I really mentioned that much before, that Rune is the area where these Easterlings mainly come from, out in the east. Next game then, as you said, Dave, already, the Battle for Middle-earth. So we see Easterling pikemen. They are a unit in all 3 of the Battle of Middle-earth games.
Yeah.
And they are available to the Mordor faction. And finally, in the video game, the Middle-earth Shadow of War, there are Easterlings that you can hire as mercenaries. And these Easterlings are depicted similarly to those in the films. So they obviously just went in and took whatever the kind of visuals that Peter Jackson had given. They were like, okay, we're going to have them exactly as that. So you can get these mercenary Easterlings, which is deadly as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that's class. We've played both those games. I'm assuming that's the second one, Shadow of Mordor.
I haven't played it. I've only played the first one, Shadow of Mordor. Yeah.
Oh, so the second one is Shadow of War. I don't think I got far in that at all. After a while, it was like, that game's like 4 years old now, and I'm playing some Star Wars things, so probably can't play it. But like, I should go back and play it because, man, that game was so cool. Yeah,
they were really cool games. They were really cool games. I loved like the graphics were savage in them, and just the gameplay was
violence. Class. And also, what was that system where you could like control?
You could wraith into. You were
wraith.
You were Celebrimbor as a wraith.
But they also had a specific system. We talked about it in our gaming podcast before. I can't remember the name of it, but it's like very unique to just this game where you can control different orcs, and like when you kill an orc, or if an orc kills you, you actually die in the game. You come back as a wraith, and that orc has like basically been promoted.
Orc levels up.
Yeah, and they remember you, and like they can get promoted, and then they become like a harder to kill orc. And yeah, it was really the Nemesis system.
Yeah,
that was the name of it.
Right. Yeah, that's it. I remember you telling me about this before, and that was the thing that really got me interested in this game, and that's why I wanted to play it. And I was going to say that's why I went out and bought it. I didn't do that. You just gave it to me, and then but you give me loads of games. You're like, this is a class game, you should play it. I'm always like, okay, thanks, and I never do. But the fact that you were like, okay, it's got this Nemesis system, I was like, oh, that is actually really cool. So I went out and I made the effort, and I played the game, and I loved it. I completed it. It's class.
So completed it, mate.
I shaped the history of Middle-earth. I crafted the rings of power.
Celebrimbor, greatest smith of the Second Age.
So that's that. We're going to get back into a little bit more lore, and we're going to look at the Second Age. So the First Age, there was a lot of stuff going on. The Second Age is going to be not quite as lore heavy, but it is quite interesting as well. And the Easterlings, as I said, when I came into this episode, I was like, I'll just do something that there's not a whole lot on, and I'll just kind of, do kind of an easy episode. But as I was looking into it, I was like, oh man, I have to include this, because it's like, there's just so much cool information about them, kind of like, and they're just flowing through the whole history of Middle Earth. So
you were trying
Age.
You were trying to do 2 easy episodes, but as I always say, never half-ass 2 things, whole-ass 1 thing, and that's exactly what you've done. So I'm proud of you.
I'm giving you the whole of my asshole.
Please don't. Please do not do that.
I meant asshole, like WH.
I know what you meant. Your whole ass.
Correct. It's not coming across. Anyway, never mind. Moving on.
We need the visual.
Oh God. Don't check us out on YouTube if you're thinking about it.
Hit that like and subscribe.
In the Second Age, the term Easterling referred to various nations and tribes of men living in uncharted lands in the east of the Sea of Rhun and Mordor. Most of them were under the dominion of a new king and god, Sauron. So this is like Sauron has appeared on the scene, and the first Easterlings in the First Age, who had all been kind of under the dominion of Morgoth and following him and kind of considering he was this god, they were like, okay, we've got this new god and this new king who's called Sauron, so we're going to follow him around. Kind of like what we saw in season 1 of the Rings of Power, where there's some people are like, oh, he's have you heard of him?
Yeah,
Sauron and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of
lad, Waldrig.
I did like that from the first season of Rings of Power. I liked how they had like these peoples who, had nothing. They've
just been suppressed for so many years, waiting for. It's almost like Jews waiting for the second coming, or is it the third coming? I don't know, of Christ, and they're just like waiting for it to happen, and then finally, finally they get the sign, and Sauron has come.
Yeah, so Sauron's the heir of Morgoth, and they're like, okay, we've got someone that we can really get behind now. So there were still a few men, of course, who were not entirely bad, and they didn't want to follow Sauron. And this is another thing that's quite interesting, that in the middle of the Second Age, who kind of showed up in the middle of the Second Age, Dave, and went out east?
The Meteor Man. The stranger. Who showed up and went east? I believe it would have been one of the two wizards, or both the two wizards, right?
Which two wizards?
The blue wizard, sorry.
Well done. Correct. You're the two wizards.
I said two
wizards.
wizards.
There were five.
Yeah.
Two
Yeah.
rhymes with blue. Dave gets confused sometimes.
It does, yeah.
So yeah, the blue wizards kind of rocked up on scene in the middle of the second age, the year 1600. And they headed off east, and they wanted to help these few Easterlings that had rebelled against the worship of the Dark Lord. And the influence of these two Istari delayed and weakened Sauron's gathering of the Morgul host for his war with the elves. So that's really cool. I mean, we've already seen that the wizard from the new Rings of Power series, who a lot of people consider is Gandalf, we've seen that he is going to be going out to Rune. And I remember the first time we saw the images, we were like, oh, that looks like Rune, because it's all like sandy and, you know, it looked like desert and that kind of stuff. But then we actually got the word Rune name dropped in an article, so we know that one of the wizards is out in Rune. And so that's why a lot of us are kind of going, oh man, I wonder, is this going to be a blue wizard? That'd be really cool to get to see on the screen as well. So another area that there isn't much information out there. So the blue wizards. And if you want to know more about the blue wizards, go check out our episode on the blue wizards. So you'll get to hear all you need to know.
Then there are the two blue wizards. You know, I've quite forgotten their names.
So yeah, so it'd be really cool to see what the Blue Wizards are getting up to if we do get to see them in that TV series. But anyway, these Blue Wizards, they arrived, as I said, they went out east, and we know that they went out east. So one of the things that they were doing was trying to just kind of dilute Sauron's influence, I suppose. And we don't really know too much about what they did, and we know that was their intention, but there's a lot of speculation as to whether they kind of just got sidetracked. I think in order to take people's focus off Sauron, they kind of set up their own little cults and their other little like religions, and people kind of got distracted by those and they stopped following Sauron. But then also I think the Blue Wizards may have just kind of forgotten about their task and just kind of had all these people following them around like they were cult leaders, and they were just like, all right, what were we supposed to do again? I don't know. Did I leave the stove on? I can't remember.
They weren't the wisest of wizards, no, to be fair.
No, they were not. But anyway, moving on. About 100 years later, in the year 1695, the Easterlings were promised land and booty by Sauron, kind of pirate-esque. And they
were promised land and what?
Booty.
Ah, yes.
Big booty.
Lots and lots of booty.
Yeah. And so they headed westward into the land of the enemies, and they joined orcs, and they waged war on the nearby Northmen and Durin's folk, so the dwarves. And this is where we meet another famous Easterling. Can you think of any famous Easterlings, Dave?
I can think of one. Is he very evil?
Yes.
Is it Camul the Easterling?
Yes, it is. He was called the Black Easterling. Why was he called the Black Easterling, Dave?
Well, I don't know. I know later on he becomes more black because he turns into
that's
an
when
Nazgul.
he gets called. Yeah, that's when he was called that. Yeah. So as you said,
okay.
Sorry, he was called the Black Easterling. That was one of his titles as a Nazgul. So
right, okay. Sorry,
this
yes.
is
For anyone that doesn't know, that is one of the Nazgul, Camul the Easterling.
Yeah,
I think he's the only named one, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So Camul. Anyway, so he was a king around this time in the middle of the Second Age, and he was the king of the Easterlings, and he was given one of the 9 rings of power by Sauron, and he became a powerful sorcerer. And of course, that was until the power of Sauron's ring corrupted him, and around the Second Age, 2251. Camul became a wraith, and he became one of Sauron's most terrible servants. And as I said, he was known as the Black Easterling, which I think is a badass name. It's pretty cool. And yeah, he's the only. Yeah,
but like,
very good.
But you said he was a bad servant. What was he doing? Like dropping the tea and coffee when he was trying to serve?
No, I said he was one of the most terrible servants. I don't mean bad.
Yeah, so he was terrible.
I mean terrible as in evil.
Terrible at his job. Like that's what you meant.
He was really bad. Yeah,
I'm really picking up what you're putting down. Yeah. So he would come in like Mrs. Doyle with cups of tea, and he'd be like, "Milk and 2 sugars," and he'd be like, "No, black." And he'd be like, "Milk and 2 sugars." Okay. Terrible.
Right, yeah. So it's kind of. When Dave hears of like some bad guys, he just thinks of just some guys that are not very, they're just not up to the tasks that they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when you said he was the most terrible servant, I was like, oh, well, why didn't he just get another servant?
He did. He got 8 more.
That's very true.
So, as Dave correctly said, he was the only named Nazgul, and he was also the Nazgul that we probably get most, I was going to say screen time, but I mean kind of page time in the Lord of the Rings books. We get to hear loads about what he was doing. We didn't really, I don't know if we get to know it at the time, but there's kind of, it reflects back on it at one point. We get to know that he was the one that was kind of in the Shire, going around asking for Baggins.
That's right.
And there's again, I went back to the trusty Tolkien Gateway and I just pulled this little excerpt out here, which I'm going to read for you. And it says, by the Second Age 2251, he and the other 8 men who had received Rings of Power first appeared as ringwraiths. After the Witch King, Camul had the best ability to perceive the presence of the One Ring, but his power was mostly confused and diminished by daylight. So that's cool. He was second to the Witch King, really, in some of these powers. Continuing on, in the Third Age, 2951, Sauron declared himself openly to his enemies and sent Camul and 2 other ringwraiths to Dol Guldur, with Camul taking command. So 3 ringwraiths are sent to Dol Guldur, and he's the boss of these other 2. And we know that Dol Guldur became a pretty dangerous and evil place, and that was thanks to Mr. Camul. So fair play to him.
It's pretty cool.
And a couple of other little travels that were mentioned. We see that Camul arrived in Hobbiton on the evening of the 23rd of September, and he asked Hamfast Gamgee about Baggins. Hamfast, of course, is
Sam's
also
old
known
gaffer.
as the gaffer, exactly, Sam's father. Hamfast Gamgee misled him, and he told him that Frodo Baggins had already left, and he rode to the east. Then on the next day, on the 24th of September, he rode on the Stock Road and he overtook Frodo and stopped because he sensed the ring, but he was not certain because of the bright daylight and left again and waited until the night. After the sunset, he sensed the ring again and pursued Frodo. He did not dare to attack and retreated because he was intimidated by the elves and by the song about Elbereth. He could not sense the ring clearly as long as Frodo was surrounded by the elves. So again, for any of our listeners who are not aware, while Frodo, when he left the Shire and he headed towards Bree, he actually bumped into and hung out with loads of elves and spent the night getting to know a lot of them, and was given advice by these elves as well. And that was also helpful because the ringwraiths, as we said, were actually trying to get him at that time, and they were like, oh, elves around, stay clear.
Yeah, and hearing Elbereth as well, it's pretty cool. It's cool that he's the most sensitive to the One Ring. I wonder, like, more sensitive
After the Witch King.
Okay, right. I was gonna. We don't really have any information on which Nazgul which ones fell into Wraith mode. So
No, it's one of those areas that we really we are lacking a bit of information.
but we do know when he was, right? But not the Witch King.
We know when he. Well, I would just say to our listeners, go back and listen to our episode on the Nazgul, because we've got an episode on all the nine rings and the Nazgul. So,
link in the description below.
Link in the description. Keeping going then here, the last little thing from the Tolkien Gateway. It says, after the departure of the elves, Camul continued to pursue Frodo, but does not find him and call the other ringwraiths from Dol Guldur to him with cries. He and another ringwraith from Dol Guldur went east over the fields, and Camul visits Farmer Maggot. After leaving Farmer Maggot, he sent his companion off to take the causeway in the direction of the overburn marshes, and he went north in the direction of the Brandywine Bridge, but Camul then arrived too late at the Bucklebury Ferry in the night of the 25th of September. And it goes on and on and on. You can actually go and check it out on Tolkien Gateway. There's literally almost in that period, there's almost day by day. So then what did Camul do? Or where did he go then? And it's really, really cool. But
He obviously kept a diary.
Yeah. Then the final thing on Camul is that in the third Hobbit film, the Battle of the Five Armies, one of the Nazgul is depicted in armor resembling that of the Easterlings, which is in what scene, Dave?
Yeah, it's in the. Where is that? Is that Dol Guldur? Yeah, that's Dol Guldur, isn't it? When Galadriel
exactly, in Dol Guldur, in the White Council show up and they...
so Galadriel, Saruman and Gandalf are all there, and they're fighting off some of the Nazgul.
And Elrond as well.
And Elrond, yeah. But we get to see... We kind of get to see the Wraith form... Or, well, they kind of go into their Wraith version similar
yes, we
to...
can see them in their kind of king form.
Yeah,
Same
but
as the way, the same
yes.
as the way Frodo sees them, I suppose.
But it's definitely a lot clearer, and you get to see them.
It is, and again, maybe I'm not sure if that's because of the time that had passed with the Lord of the Rings to the Hobbit movies, that they had better technology and they were able to use it better, or they just wanted to show them a little bit more clearly and put a bit more time into their designs.
It was definitely
one of them.
Yeah, sorry. It was definitely more of a Easter egg as well, just kind of showing, or Easterling egg, showing off like where. I don't remember what the other Nazgul what they look like. I think one of them might have been looked like a woman. I'm not sure on that, but like I think they were all supposed to depict
maybe.
something. Like one looked like it was an old elf, like maybe from the battle of the, like the very first battle in the beginning. I was about to say the Battle of the Five Armies, but no.
No, this was from the film, The Battle of the Five Armies. But yes, as I said, one of these Nazgul is in armor resembling that of the Easterlings, and this is undoubtedly intended to be Camul. So a little kind of Easter egg there, or Dave, as you said, and a little Easterling egg, which I like that. Very, very nice reference.
Delicious.
Moving on then, we're going to get into the Third Age. So what happened in the Third Age? Well, again, this is probably the most well-known age for anybody who is more of a casual fan, because of course what happened in the Third Age, the Lord of the Rings happened in the Third Age. So First Age is very kind of, elves against Morgoth and Silmarillion stuff. Second Age is probably the least written about. So now moving into the Third Age, in the Third Age, of course, Sauron's defeat in the War of the Last Alliance had freed the Easterlings from his tyranny, but not from the evil or from the lies that he had sown in their hearts. Aside from fighting amongst themselves, they frequently attacked men of Gondor and the lands bordering Rhûn. Then in the Third Age, 490, they invaded Gondor, starting a series of wars that lasted 60 years until they were finally defeated in the year 550 by Turambar, the ninth king of Gondor. And this king took from them a large area of land east of Mordor, including the Sea of Rhûn. So the king just came in and just like, okay, I'm just going to take all your land and good luck.
As well.
And
that's mine.
took the sea as well, yeah. After this great defeat, it was many centuries before they were again a threat, until agents of the Dark Lord promoted the rise of the Wain Riders, which is what we're going to look at now again. Now, maybe that sounds familiar to you, Dave, the Wain Riders at all? No?
Doesn't sound too familiar to me now. The Wain Riders. Is it like, how do you spell Wayne there? Like Rooney or like children in Northern Ireland?
Wain, Wain, Wain Riders. So look, we're going to look at them now quickly, but as I explain them, this might just ring a couple of bells. But the Wain Riders, they were a league of Easterling tribes who were united by their hatred of the Kingdom of Gondor. Following the Great Plague, which had weakened Gondor, they started their attacks in the year 1856 of the Third Age, defeating Gondor at the Battle of the Plains and killing King Narmasul II. So again, we had this great plague in Gondor. Gondor were at a really weak and low point, and then these Wain Riders, this like faction of Easterlings, who they came in on chariots, and that's what they were famous for, and that's where they got the name from. They came in and they defeated Gondor in this battle. They raided vast areas basically of Gondor's lands, and they destroyed it, and they enslaved all of Gondor's people. So it's pretty big win for these Wain Riders. Then in the year 1899 of the Third Age, the 13th king of Gondor defeated the Wain Riders, buying some respite for his land. However, the Wain Riders struck back again in 1944, allying themselves with the Haradrim of Near Harad and the Veriargs of Khand. Before this, they had been expanding their power southward beyond Mordor and had come into conflict with the tribes of Khand and the Eastern Haradrim. So that's kind of cool as well, that they were going down, expanding, and they come into conflict with these different tribes around the place that are also kind of, as we know, kind of evil men. And they're like, hey, are you evil? I'm evil too. Let's join forces. And we all hate Gondor, basically. So
and we're all terrible servants.
Yeah, well, it says that they all they allied under their universal hate of the West. So they were like, you know what I hate? The West.
And
like,
you know what I love? Big booty. So let's go get some.
So this trio of tribes, they managed to kill King Ondaher and all of his heirs, but instead of riding on then to Minas Anor and taking the city, they paused to celebrate. And Now I'm going to mention another person's name who you may remember. So do you remember General Earnil?
It
Remember
sounds
something
familiar.
of battling the Witch King or something like that?
Yes. I'm gonna say yes.
Yes, but not really. Okay, again, I've done podcasts on this as well. So again, whenever I do a podcast, I've done all the research, and with Dave, vice versa. So when you're researching a podcast, you go deep, and you're like, oh my god, I remember all this stuff. But,
Yeah, I
when you're
remember-
just sitting there listening, you're like, what are you on about?
This is the podcast that was from like all of this was taken from text in the appendices, right?
That's right. Yes,
Yeah.
well done. You do remember.
No, I do. I remember the podcast. I remember how excited you were reading about it on the plane when we were going to Spain.
Oh, that's
or
right.
somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And you were like, yeah, there was this like king in Gondor called, what was his name? Earndil?
Earnil.
Earnil, yeah. No, I remember us talking about it before.
Yeah, we were on a
podcast.
plane. I don't think we were sitting together, and I think I was like,
you came down and you're like, Dave, check this out.
Yeah, and I'd highlighted loads of this part from the book, and I like got up out of my seat and walked over to where you were. I was like, Dave, oh my god, this part's so class, because I don't think I'd ever read the appendices until that point, so that was really cool. Anyway, moving back to where we were. So, this guy, he was a king, but at this point I'm looking at he was a general. So this general Earnil of Gondor's southern army, he rode and he defeated an inferior force of Haradrim in South Ithilien, and then he marched north. He marched north, and he came too late to rescue the king, but he did manage to annihilate the Wain Riders for good at the Battle of Camp. And then because of this, Earnil was subsequently crowned king. And if I remember correctly, he was crowned king because he was the general, he was the highest in command, but he also, through like some other long line, he had a little bit of royal blood in him, so it was like enough for him to take up the crown. And so he wasn't a steward of Gondor, for example, he still was king. So he was crowned king at this point, and then after this defeat for the Easterlings, the might of the Wain Riders was broken, and their tribal confederation was split up. So then after this, the Easterlings were quiet for 500 years until the rise of a new group, which were called the Balcuth.
Cool.
So, again, just very quick, shorter description on who these guys were now. The Balcuth, again, this is 500 years after the Wain Riders. So these were a fierce group of Easterlings that were goaded by Sauron into joining with the Orcs over the Misty Mountains and attacking the Gondorians. Then in the Third Age, the year 2510, they overran the plains of Rohan and they almost destroyed the army of the ruling steward Cirion, but were defeated by the Eotheid under Earl the Young in the Battle of the Field of Celebrant. Like the Wain Riders, they rode in chariots and wagons, and they may have been descendants of these people. Then in the year 2545, the Easterlings sought retribution for the Balcuth's defeat, and they attacked the Rohirrim. They were defeated, but the king of Rohan, who was Earl, he fell in battle. And then by the year 2758, they were stirred by Sauron into allying with the Corsairs and the Dunlendings. While Gondor faced the fleets of Umbar, the eastern invaders joined the Wild Men's assault upon Rohan. In the aftermath of the Long Winter, the Easterlings were destroyed or retreated, and the Rohirrim drove the Dunlendings from their land. So there's all this history, and all the time I'm kind of going, the Dunlendings, whoever. You're kind of going, oh my god, the Easterlings are just, they're around the whole time, and they're just like there in the background, just being evil men, just joining the sides of evil and joining Sauron's sides, and they're just, they've a lot to do with like the death of Earl. They're fighting the Rohirrim, they're fighting the dwarves, they're fighting everyone. So
it's cool as well, because like you kind of think, when I think of evil men in Middle Earth, you always think of the East and the South and the Haradrim and the Easterlings and everything. But yeah, you kind of sometimes you do forget the Dunlendings, and because of what you just read out there, it kind of makes you think that in the beautiful and magical world of Middle Earth, you have like the men that awoke in the east, and then you've got the Edain, and they kind of went west. But then obviously you've got men like mixing in, and if those were like the original servants of Morgoth, like some of the men that came over near Rohan and they ended up being Dunlendings, it really does make you think like it is kind of black and white in Middle Earth. It's not like you don't have like just random grey people. There can't be like some random evil man in Rohan apart from Grima. But you know what I mean? He could be a Dunlendi. Like, we don't know. But it just seems like everyone actually does have an intrinsic part to their human nature, whether they're good or evil. And I think that's cool. I like that.
Maybe. I don't know if I would completely agree. I think, there's still probably a lot of room for some people that could, I've already mentioned in this podcast that some people in the East didn't want to do that, and then they kind of maybe
I don't mean
with the Blue Wizards, and
yeah, sorry, I don't mean to like exaggerate and say like there are none, but I just mean like it is rooted in your core. And even we see in the TV show The Rings of Power how the elves, Arondir and those, they're looking over the men, the Southlanders, and they're like, well, we haven't done anything here, and they're just like, well, your ancestors did, and like we know what your ancestor did hundreds of years ago. It's in your blood. And we see Waldrig, he's like destined to become a follower of Sauron, and half of them all leave. Now, I'm not putting that down as lore, but I think they didn't just lift that from nowhere.
I think from season 1 of The Rings of Power, I think that's maybe one of my favorite kind of ideas. Now, seeing it played out on screen, I'm not going to say it was my favorite part watching it, but there were certainly parts of it that I was like, this is a really cool idea. I really liked the way that they're investigating that a little bit more. I thought maybe just the final result of it, maybe just, again, there's lots of factors that could have been, maybe they weren't able to get huge numbers of extras, and that's why I kind of had something felt a bit off about the way it was done. But I really enjoyed the idea of, okay, there are these people who are, they're destined to become, the evil followers of Sauron, but then also like the elves who have just been around for so long, and it's like, your ancestors. So they might be talking about, 200-300 years, and for these people, it's like that's like an absolute millennium ago. They're like, I can't, like, what do I have to do with this person? But the elves are like, well, for me that was like last week, and
I remember that person.
Yeah, exactly. I killed your grandfather, or your great grandfather.
And now I'm here to kill you.
Moving on to the final part of this little history and tale is the final part of the Third Age, which was the War of the Ring. Now, during the War of the Ring, at the end of the Third Age, most of the Easterlings openly returned to Sauron's service, but the infighting caused by the Blue Wizards' interference took its toll. So that meant that the Dark Lord's eastern forces were smaller than what they could have been. Now, a large number of Easterlings were part of the armies of Mordor that the Witch King led in the siege of Gondor. They were defeated, however, in the wake of the Nazgul Lord's death. So again, that's like on the battlefield. The Witch King goes down, and then suddenly all of his Easterling armies are kind of behind him. We're just like, oh god, we're screwed. And then they were all defeated after that. Other Easterling legions joined Sauron's host in the battle against the Men of Dale and the dwarves of the Lonely Mountain. The final overthrow of their master in the Battle of the Black Gate shattered their morale, and they were driven back. And the final part here is that the Easterlings that had stood with Sauron remained a great threat throughout the early Fourth Age, but were finally subdued in a series of campaigns led by King Elisar, aka Aragorn. Whereas the Easterlings who had rejected the Dark Lord continued to uphold the secret cults and magic traditions established by the Blue Wizards. So the lads that are off in the East that are, rejecting the whole idea that they start to follow the Blue Wizards, like even into the Fourth Age when, the Lord of the Rings ends and Aragorn becomes the king, he still goes on, he's battling all these Easterlings. Then these other Easterlings are just kind of going, what's going on over there? We're over here praising these Blue Wizards and singing songs about them and just like thinking that everything's great. So that was still going on.
You can check it out. We'll link that in the episode description below as well. We have an episode on the two Blue Wizards. Go find out all about those bad boys.
Dave, before we wrap up though, I want to look a little bit more just at their weapons and their armor, because we already touched on it just a little bit, but I just wanted to say that like not much is known about the weapons used by the Easterlings, and they had, as far as it's known, among their arsenal they had spears and bows and pikes and axes and chariots, and they also seem to favour the horse on many occasions, although this probably differed greatly among the Easterling tribes, their kingdoms or their empires. But speaking also about their armour, the armour of the Easterlings entering the Black Gates was those ones that we saw on screen at least. It was made from bronze along with the helmet, and its dragon skull shape was made to intimidate the enemies. That's the helmet I'm talking about.
It intimidated me, all right, yeah.
Oh yeah, it's freaky. Their gold or brass overlaid steel armor consisted of a placard, which is a stomach plate, a gorget, which is a heart and neck coverage, a groin plate, and then braces for the arms, the thighs, and the knees. Now, the clothing that they wore consisted of red leather gloves, black leather tall boots, burgundy tunic with long sleeves, a headscarf, and a black face cloth. And the brass helmet was worn over the headscarf and featured cheek and eye guards, along with 2 horns and a crest to the front to intimidate the enemy. Again, horns on their helmets, things like that. But again, it is cool that their helmets had, like, you know, the little coverings for their eyes, and kind of like what we see Eowyn wearing as well when she's trying to hide her appearance. So
I don't know, what
cool
are
to
those
see
things
that as well.
called? The little eye guard things. Is there a specific name for that kind of?
it's just, they're called
part.
here cheek and eye guards. So yeah, there you go.
Yeah, cool.
Not
Yeah,
too
no,
complicated.
I think that their armor is actually one of the cooler costume designs in Peter Jackson. Like, out of all the warriors that attack Minas Tirith, like, obviously the orcs are primarily featured, and I don't know, maybe they didn't have enough costumes of the Easterlings. Well, we've seen the behind the scenes. They probably, I think they had like hundreds of those
They have
alone.
loads. They have
And-
loads. Yeah,
But
they-
like, I wonder why they weren't featured more. They're just so cool.
I
to
wonder
look
if there's
at.
any behind the scenes shots of them actually, you know, in formation in battle, and then they just couldn't use them in the end or something like that. It'd be so gutting if you had to, like, you know, cut that just to make the time.
It would have been
But,
cool. Like, I know their shields are not as big as like Roman big massive wall shields, but like, it would have been cool if they were able to form that little, you know, that little position, that kind of thing where
Or
you
do that
make-
thing from like 300.
Yeah, where you create like a wall. Well, I suppose, yeah, in 300 they had the like circular shields, didn't they? Oh no, did they?
Yeah,
have
and they
big
were able to
square
do. No, they had
ones? Did they have square. Oh no, they had big square ones. I think. I'm picturing
There's circular
both.
ones. I think in one of the Viking series, I can't remember if it's Vikings or if it's Valhalla, they have the small kind of circular ones, but they still manage to like all form this like big giant wall of circular ones, and they kind of move at the same time, and they're all like really well in sync and stuff. But actually, just talking about their shields, that was the next thing I was going to come to. So it says that the Easterling shield was a curved rectangular 2 foot by 3 foot concave shield, and it was made with brass that surrounded a dark brown square. It was held by an iron hand grip that was behind a brass circular boss surrounded by a diamond shape that was itself enveloped by the square. And one rather striking detail on the runic armor was that a sun was etched into their sternum plate, resembling a burning of a grassland such as Rohan or Dale.
Deadly. That's a really cool little detail.
A little feature.
By the way, it's worth noting that this is all Peter Jackson's. This isn't taken from any of Tolkien's book. Like, this is Peter Jackson's vision and the costume department's vision alone. But yeah, it's so cool, so cool. Like, you don't even get to see that little, what is a circular field burning. Like, I would have never known that. That's pretty cool,
Exactly. It's just these tiny little details that they went into, and then obviously during battle, these heavy infantrymen formed the core of Sauron's armies, for they were taller and better equipped than orcs. However, obviously orcs made up the majority, but these guys were their, like, you know, special forces, I suppose. So it's kind of cool.
They were like the Roman centurions when the orcs were more like the feckin', what are they called? Like the legions, or the shittier ones, the cannon fodder. I
Just
suppose.
the infantry.
Yeah, just
cannon
the
fodder,
regular
yeah.
infantry. Yeah.
Yeah. The final thing I'm going to talk about here is the Lord of the Rings strategy battle game. So
Class.
we've already looked at video games, but I want to look at these like strategy games, which are really cool as well. So in this game,
Is this like a board
the
game you're
Easterlings-
talking?
This is a board game. You get these little
right.
figurines with them, and
we're
you
talking
get
about
the
my
Easterling
game.
figurines.
Like,
Yeah,
the one
those,
where you
like,
paint them.
I don't know if it's the one that you paint or not. I think that's a separate thing.
No,
But
read it out to me again. What's the name?
It's called the Lord of the Rings strategy battle game.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's the
one they used,
the
Dad?
models that you paint. I was actually
Oh,
going
you
to bring that
paint
up.
as well?
That I loved. I
Oh,
loved like
savage.
actually painting. I had a group of Easterlings, and you could paint them. But
You
like,
were such a nerd.
I was such a nerd. Yeah, but I loved.
I don't know why
that
we're
so
using
much.
past tense.
Yeah, you were a nerd when this was recorded, which came out a couple of weeks later for the listener.
So in that strategy battle game, I'd forgotten that you actually get to, because I was looking it up online. I saw some images of the little figurines, but I'd forgotten that these were ones that you actually get to paint yourselves. So that's another bonus feature, which is class. But in this game, the Easterlings have a unique type of cavalry known as cataphracts, and these were Easterlings mounted upon heavily armored horses and wielding a scimitar and a broad shield. Now, they were notorious for their... A scimitar is a type of sword.
Is that the like curvy one?
I don't think so.
Kind of like
a sword.
Oh, is it? Okay. Scimitar.
I think so.
I think I can picture what the horse looks like. Is it just like literally covered in like big, huge kind of golden plates of chainmail, almost from like head to toe, like a big dress just draped over?
I don't think it's completely down the sides. I think it was mainly down the front, like kind of like a long V down the front, and then it had a little bit on the sides as well. I don't think it was completely covered like down to the ground or anything. But like I think his legs had coverings, and then it was like just like the mainly the front, because when they're charging towards people, that's where they needed to have that.
Yeah,
that
but they were blind.
So,
yeah, you said they had cataracts. Yeah. You can't go far if you're blind horse.
I said that this type of cavalry were known as cataphracts, but maybe they had cataracts as well. But anyway, moving on. These were, as I said, these were Easterlings mounted upon heavily armoured horses and wielding a scimitar and a broad shield. They were notorious for their ferocity of their attacks and defensive power when they were deployed side by side. The brass armour on the front of the horses allowed them to safely trample spearmen and pikemen. So that's pretty badass. Like, okay, you know those spearmen that are trying to like take out our horses? They just cover our horses in armour so they could just trample those men nicely.
That is pretty cool. I just like how nice that sounded as well. It was like, they could safely trample,
they could effectively and safely and
absolutely crush the skull of any oncoming pikeman.
Runic short bows were sometimes taken instead of shields. So they were just like, we don't even need shields. We're just going to take our short bows instead. Wield that with my left hand while I've got my scimitar in my right hand. But just to give you a little bit of... just to give you a little bit of information on where that... not quite cataracts, but that name comes from. So cataphracts is from the ancient Greek derivative worm... from the...
Sorry, okay.
Cataphracts is from the ancient Greek derivative word cataphractos, meaning the armoured. Translation to cataphract in English, which is the same word but spelled with a C instead of a K. And cataphracts were heavily armoured cavalry. This is in the real world now. They were heavily armed cavalry used as elite troops or bodyguards. The Sassanid Persian Empire had elite troops called the Sauron cataracts. The Sassanid Persian Empire had elite troops called the Sauron cataphracts. Cataphracts are thought to have been developed as early as the 8th century BC by Middle Eastern cultures such as Assyrians and the Achaemenid Empire. Such heavy horse troops were integrated into the Roman army sometime around the 2nd century BC and became a distinct troop regiment by the time of Hadrian in the 2nd century AD. So there you go.
There you go, yeah. When Hadrian was over bossing England, setting up all of his walls for daddy, chilling out with cataracts. Poor guy.
Yeah. Everyone had cataracts back then.
Oh, yeah. Cataracts.
So there we are. Now I want to there was a lot in that, so I want to wrap up, and I want to wrap up that by, as I said, I didn't mean to get so in depth with this. Dave, if you remember, I said, Dave, I'm going to do a nice easy topic this week. So I was like, I'm just going to try and find a topic that doesn't have too much information. So I'm not going to get too caught in the weeds, but I still managed to regale you with all 4 ages of Middle Earth. So sorry about that.
This might be one of the first podcasts that we've ever done where we actually had some information dump on all 4 ages.
Like a timeline through the ages.
There might be one or two of those.
Interesting, maybe, but that's an interesting thing that the Easterlings, they're connected throughout all 4 ages of
Well, there you go. Johnny's like, I'm just going to pick one of the oldest races in Middle Earth. Well, they're all pretty old, but
Yeah. But to sum up, the main question that comes up about the Easterlings that you'll find everyone asking is, why were they evil? why were these men evil when, you know, there were good men around the place? You're kind of going, but the orcs are supposed to be the evil ones, and, you know, why, maybe, you know, goblins and stuff like that, and, you know, whoever else. But men were, you know, they were saying, oh, these men could have been good. So why were they evil? I'm going to break it down into, this is just, you know, wrapping up and summing up, and we're going back over what we learned today. I feel like I'm giving a lecture here, but I've broken it down into like 4 different sections. So the first one is their alliance to dark powers. So remember that from their early history, many Easterlings aligned themselves with the greatest evils of their time. In the First Age, a significant group aligned themselves with Morgoth, who was the first Dark Lord. Then we had the sons of Ulfang. Remember them? One of them was the Accursed. They betrayed the Eldar and the other men, the Edain, during that pivotal battle of the unnumbered tears, and that caused massive casualties and strategic defeat for the Free Peoples. And remember, it was also known as the treachery of men, which was not very good for these lads. Then we had in the Second Age, we had the Easterlings. They came under the dominion of Sauron, who lured them into wars, further solidifying their role as antagonists. And again, featuring none other than Cumul, the Nazgul. He was one of their kings, and he at this time was given a ring of power, and that was further intertwining their fate with Sauron's dark designs. So that's my first point, their alliance with the dark powers. The second thing was their brutal actions and the oppression. So the Easterlings, their rule in Hithlum after the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, this exemplified their cruelty. They enslaved the local population, plundered their lands, and imposed harsh governance. Their chief, Lorgan, ruled with extreme cruelty, robbing and enslaving the inhabitants and seizing young women to produce heirs. So not great. The third thing would be their continued hostility during the Third Age. So the Easterlings, their hatred towards the Free Peoples persisted into the Third Age. They frequently attacked Gondor and its neighbours, driven by hatred and often manipulated by Sauron's agents. Notable groups like the Wainriders and the Balcoth launched devastating invasions, causing significant death and destruction. And the final thing would be the resistance to positive influences. So while some Easterlings did rebel against the Dark Lords with the help of the Blue Wizards, these efforts were limited and not universally embraced. The majority remained under the sway of evil influences, and their societies continued to propagate these dark values and practices. So there you go. There's my 4-point conclusion and wrap up of today's episode. Welcome. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
I have 1 point that wasn't mentioned.
Oh.
Men are weak.
I think yeah, that's the best point.
The first point, probably the main point as well. Do you think that it's just pure kind of coinky-dinkness that all these men are evil because they just happen to be following, like, let's say your average man that's living there, so your average warrior who doesn't really care much, he's just going to believe in whatever his general tells him to do, and they all happen to be just following. So first of all Morgoth, and then it was Ulfang, and then it was fucking Cumul, and then Sauron, and they just happened. It seems like all the evil guys just happened to be over there in the east. What was going on in the east? They must have just been...
I told you, Dublin.
Don't listen to him, folks. Dublin is a beautiful city. Come visit me. I'll buy you a pint.
Place.
A very expensive pint. You buy me a pint.
Very good. So there you have it, guys. If you survived until now, you could be an honorary Easterling. Dave will buy you a pint. And if you've enjoyed this deep dive into the evil men of Rune, then please drop us a review on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. It's probably the best thing that you can do, actually, to expand the podcast. So yeah, leave us a 5-star rating and a comment, and do all that good stuff. Like, share, subscribe, and thanks again for tuning in and listening to the Council of Elrond.
And from the east of Ireland, have a good night.
See you guys.